Hello and welcome back. It is Monday. I am Mr. Sesotris, and this week I wanted to talk about my personal reading journey. So I'm a crazed reader. I always have been, but I was looking back at kind of the path that I took towards becoming kind of a reader. There's a cat here. Don't mind her. And a lot of it is kind of the story of like teachers being amazing. So if you ever needed proof that teachers deserve to be paid well and deserve to work in schools that are well funded, it is this story. And I'm sure there are many other people whose lives were positively impacted by teachers who encouraged their love of reading. So I learned to read really early on. It was before my brothers came around, and during the day it was just me and my mom, and she had these flashcards, these like phonics flashcards, and I remember them being like enormous. If I saw them now, they'd probably be like this big, but as a little kid I thought they were like 10 feet tall or something. And I remember the first word that I ever sounded out on my own was the word scout, and I was very proud of that. And so I started borrowing. She had all these like young readers, like those like older books I think she had from when she was younger, really simple ones. There was one called like Open the Gate, and it was like a really simple kind of fun with Dick and Jane kind of book for like little kids. I loved those because it wasn't that I was reading because I was interested in kind of what the story was about, because the stories were usually pretty simple. It was like going to the store or something, but it was the fact that I could read on my own without anyone else doing anything. That was kind of an accomplishment, and I really enjoyed that. And so I read through all those. There was like collections of short stories, some sci-fi stuff. There was like collections of old Greek myths that were kind of kid appropriate, and I loved those. And so I just read everything I could get my hands on. And this was great until I got to kindergarten, and I was kind of obnoxious as a result. Like when you're in college and it's like you're a freshman and there's like that obnoxious kid who shows up with like a brand new BMW that his parents bought him, and he just came back from like a lavish vacation in Greece, and tells everyone all about it, and you're just like, could you stop talking? That was me in kindergarten, because unfortunately that was when everyone else was learning to read, because that's what you do in kindergarten, is you encourage reading and basic math and stuff like that. And I was already like, well, I can already read. And I was like 5, so I don't blame myself for not having a lot of self-awareness, but I was obnoxious, and it was a whole thing. And so I kind of was shuffled through that, and the teacher was just kind of like, hey, whatever, do your thing. But I didn't want to read anything that the other kids were reading because it was all really simple, and I was kind of the worst. So fast forward a bit, in grade 2, that was when the teacher there, who actually I was really scared of, she was kind of a very stern person, and she didn't put up with my like obnoxiousness, which is good because she was a really good teacher. But it was like my birthday or something, and she got me a book, and she didn't get anyone else books. She kind of pulled me off to the side and was like, don't tell anyone, that I got you this. But it was the first book in the Magic Treehouse series. It was the one with the dinosaurs, because this was like 1993, 94, and that was when Jurassic Park came out, and that was my entire universe. Even though the movie scared me and gave me nightmares, it was still my favorite thing in the whole world ever, and I loved it. And so she gave me that book, and I read it, and I loved it, and I read it like literally to pieces. I didn't read any of the other ones in the series though, because I was like full-on dinosaur obsession at that time, and I looked at like what the second book was about, and I think it was like, I don't know, Camelot or something, and I was like, well, there's no dinosaurs in that book, what is this? And so I was like, so I just read the first book, and I've never actually ever read the rest of that series. But another thing that I got obsessed with at that time is the Great Illustrated Classics series. The hardcovers you still see, they're like this big, whatever, but they also came out in these little bitty paperbacks that were like these little square books, and it was kind of a kid-friendly abridged version of like a classic book, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or War of the Worlds. Those are my favorite. And on every like facing page, there was like a comic book style kind of illustration of what was going on in the book. And those illustrations were so good. They were like gritty. Some of them were really scary, and I just loved them to pieces. There's one part in War of the Worlds where one of the big tripods kind of steps out into the street during a thunderstorm at night, and he scares the main character's horse so much that like he falls and breaks his own neck, and then his like the main character's kind of left standing there in the street looking up at this huge thing towering over him, illuminated by the thunder and and lightning and everything. Yes, I know, Circe. And that image is kind of in my head forever. So every time I read like the real version of that book, I get to that scene, I still see that illustration. I'm holding the tripod because the cat is currently heaving herself against it, and I don't know why. Another book that I really, really loved at that age was Charlotte's Web, which is very different from kind of all of the other like, explosions and action and scary things that I liked. But this is another one that I just really, really loved. And I read my copy into the ground. I've gotten this. This is a fairly new one that I got recently. I loved kind of the emotional core of this one. It was sad and it dealt with sad things, and I don't know why, but I really appreciated that. Plus, I really, really loved the descriptions of like the birds. There's like, he does this thing throughout at the beginning of a chapter where he'll describe kind of what the birds are doing and like the sounds that they're making. I really, really love that. So moving on, in grade 4, I moved from Canada to the US, and I was homeschooled that year so that my mother, who is American, could teach me kind of all of the like, the new imperial system and like description, like lengths and measurements and stuff, because they're different. And so I had to kind of learn a bunch of new stuff. And so that, apart from, the parts where we were like sobbing together as we went through math homework, because neither of us like math very much, and I'm not a very logical minded person. But my mother did a really good job. But we did read Island of the Blue Dolphins that year. And this is another one that I just absolutely loved. It just gripped me. I know the book itself has kind of been reevaluated in recent years because of the way the author takes sort of artistic license with like historical events. And it is like a white author writing a story about an indigenous person. So there's going to be some things that he gets wrong. But as, a little kid, I loved this one. It was descriptive, and there's a scene where she's fighting with like a giant squid, and it's just the coolest thing ever. I really, really love this. Plus she has all these animals that she collects by the end of it. And this book really, really resonated with me. And I think this might actually be the copy that I read in grade 4. I don't remember ever getting a new one. The pages are pretty yellow. So I think this is actually the book that I read in grade 4. So I still have it because it means a lot to me. So the year after that, I was able to rejoin the real world, and I rejoined kind of, school with other people. And by that point, I was a lot less obnoxious than I had been when I was younger. And my grade 5 teacher would read us books kind of, before lunch. And at one point he read us Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And that's another one. The book is kind of, it ends every chapter with a cliffhanger. And so he did a really good job of like making, like everyone in the class would always go, no, when he would end the chapter and close the book, because we would be like, we have to hear the next, the rest of it. And he really encouraged all of us to read. We also had like, quiet reading time where we could kind of read whatever. And that was when I read a book called The White Mountains by John Christopher. I don't know if kids nowadays read this one, but it's great. And it stems back to my love of the War of the Worlds, because the premise of it is basically like, what if the aliens from War of the Worlds won and took over the Earth? Because you've got these like giant mechanical tripods, and they kind of lord over the human race, and they keep them at kind of a medieval level of technology to keep them from rising up. And of course the main character sort of learns their secrets and travels to their city and sort of starts a revolution to like take over the Earth and get it back from the tripods that have taken over. And there's 3 books in the series. I read all of them and I loved it. That's one I don't own, but it would be worth kind of finding again and just rereading it as an adult. It's written for kids, so it's probably going to be a quick, simple read. But I remember it being really evocative and scary, and I thought it was really, really cool. So moving forward, grade 7 was when I discovered Animorphs, and that was another kind of revelation. I didn't read the whole series. I think I read maybe the first 9 books, because that's all that the school that I had, or because that's all that the school I went to had in their library. But I read all of them. I was obsessed. I never watched the TV show that came out kind of around that time, but I just loved the books, and they were, again, everything that I had kind of always loved about reading. And it was also at that time that I read the His Dark Materials series for the first time, and that one really had a big effect on me. It was a little bit more mature than some of the other children's books I'd read at that point, and it really spoke to me in interesting ways, and I loved that one. But sadly, at the end of that, we had to move schools because we moved to a whole other part of the city. And so in grade 8, the school that I went to, we either didn't have a library or we did, but it was like really, really small and mostly computers. No, they had a computer room. I don't think that school actually had a library, if I think about it. But anyways, our homeroom teacher, who was also the math teacher, he had like a mini library in his classroom that was kind of like techno thrillers that were of the time. So you had like Michael Crichton and Tom Clancy and stuff. Probably not stuff that's like appropriate for teenagers to be reading, but I didn't care because he let us check them out for free. There was a little sign-up sheet, and I read them obsessively. And the first book that I read, of course, if you have to ask, was Jurassic Park. Because of course it was, because my brain is like, it's like aliens, dinosaurs, or like heartfelt explorations of deep subjects. Those are kind of the 3 genres that I'm just obsessed with. And so I read it and I was just dragged into it, and it was scary. And also, like, people use the word fuck, which, like, when you're 13 years old, you're like, ooh, this is like edgy. And I thought it was just the coolest thing ever. But that did lead to a kind of embarrassing moment later. So I started collecting all the Michael Crichton books sort of obsessively. There was a used bookstore that was just pretty close, and I'd take the bus to it, and I collected pretty much all of his books, and I loved them, but I would just read all of them kind of in order because I wanted to read everything he'd ever written. And I got to this one, Disclosure, which is about kind of gender dynamics and assault, and it's an interesting book. It's trying to make a comment about like how we view the stories of victims and whether why we should believe victims, kind of thing. It flips the thing on its head, where it has kind of a powerful woman assaulting a lower man who works for her, and then him starting a court case against her. And there's a scene near the beginning where she attacks him, and I was reading that in high school in like quiet reading time, and it was very explicit, and it was just one of those things where I was just like, oh, why am I reading this? And there's people around me, and I was sure that everyone could like read my thoughts and see how embarrassed I was to be reading this thing. The book, looking at it now, it really isn't that explicit, really. But when you're a kid, it was like one of those things where it was like, I really shouldn't be reading this. This is too adult for what I'm supposed to be reading at this point. But it's fine. But I did end up reading it, and I did end up liking the book overall because I liked Crichton's writing style, but I preferred his more sci-fi action stuff anyways. You also have to know that at that point there really wasn't a lot in terms of like YA. That wasn't really a thing yet. You had like children's books, and then you had sort of like older children's books. This is, you had like Judy Blume, and you had like The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, but those didn't really like appeal to me. I did like sort of the younger age Judy Blume books, like the Fudge books. I loved those. But there wasn't a lot in the way of like books aimed at teenagers. It was mostly like aimed at like kids who were like, 10 to 12, and like some books maybe aimed at kids who were like, 13, 14-ish, but it wasn't really a big genre yet. Harry Potter was kind of a thing. It had come out sort of around that time, but it wasn't really a big thing yet. I think only the first 2 books were out, and it was sort of one of those things that like only a few people read, and it wasn't really something that was, a phenomenon yet. And so there wasn't really a lot in the terms of YA. So a lot of kids that age, when you get to sort of your teenage years and you want something that's a little bit more mature than like children's books, you would have to jump right into kind of adult stuff. That's why a lot of people unfortunately read books like Flowers in the Attic way too young, or Stephen King way too young, because there just wasn't any books aimed at kind of our age group at the time. And so you just had to kind of leap in the deep end of like adult thrillers and horror books, and just kind of go with it. That's also when I started reading Anne Rice, which again, probably not super appropriate for like a teenager to be reading, but at the time it was like, this is the only thing that matters, because it became my whole personality for a bit. And I loved her. I've since kind of reevaluated her reading a bit, and I made a video about that, but there really wasn't a lot for like teenagers to read. And so we read awful stuff that was like way above our age level. And that's just kind of a thing that happened. So after high school, I moved into college, and I was an English major right away, because that was kind of, I was like, okay, I want to do this. Because for a long time, I wanted to do scientific things. I wanted to be a marine biologist, and I wanted to be like a, ecologist and whatnot. And so I started off and I was doing an English major program, and I wasn't very mature. I didn't have a good work ethic, and so I didn't do very well. I enjoyed what I was reading in classes, but I didn't do homework, and I skipped things, and I got bad grades. So I dropped out, and then I moved to the US, and I started college there after taking a year off. And this is a bit of a digression, but I promise it does link back. But so then I was a theater kid. I was a theater major. And because I figured, I'm obnoxious, so I would fit in here. And little did I know, theater kids are way more obnoxious than I could ever hope to be. They were all so obsessed that I was just like, you know what? I don't care about this as much as they do. So I switched my degree again, and I went into dance because, I don't know, I was like, I want to be the center of attention. But that didn't last very long. That was like a bit, I just did that to kind of turn my theater thing into like a minor, so that I could be like, okay, I have a minor in theater, whatever, moving on. But I hated dance. I was not very good at it. I'm not flexible. And then I learned that you had to be like skinny forever to do that, and that just appalled me. All of the other guys in the program all had like body image issues, and they all just seemed so unhappy. And I was like, this sounds like the worst thing ever, because I hated being skinny. And so I was like, okay, no, we're moving on. And so I went back into English, but my years in theater and dance and all that stuff had kind of increased my confidence level a little bit, and got me used to like talking in front of people and being more, outgoing. And so I did a lot better once I went back into English. And that was kind of when I really like dive headfirst into it. I realized that I loved it. I read everything. I did really well. I was able to bring my grades back up and graduated with a pretty good GPA. And it was just, I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. So then I went into grad school right away, and that was where I fell in love with modernist literature. I read like Virginia Woolf and James Joyce and T.S. Eliot and all them. And that's when I really, the obsession started. And so then I wrote my master's thesis, which was looking at sort of The Wizard of Oz through the lens of Jean Baudrillard. and looking at how kind of like memes and the Hollywood remake culture and how the Wizard of Oz story had kind of been like become kind of central to sort of pop culture, because there's always a new version of Wizard of Oz or something related to it pretty much constantly from then on out. And I did end up writing my master's thesis, and it's done and it's here, and I'm very proud of it. But I was obsessed, and so I did a few years as an adjunct teacher after that, and discovered that I didn't really like teaching. I liked talking in front of classes and that part of it, but I didn't like dealing with the administration side of everything, and I hated grading. If I could just like give grades based on vibes, that would be perfect, but that's unrealistic and you have to grade things, so unfortunately. But I'm really glad that I got out of teaching before AI hit, because I really don't think I would have adjusted well to having to deal with that. And the teachers right now that are dealing with having to like overhaul their entire pedagogy because of incorporating AI and the challenges and the benefits and the fears and all that, you people are rock stars. So thank a teacher, because they are dealing with kids who are learning how to use AI, and it's very hard for them. So, be aware of that. So after that, the pandemic hit, and that was when I discovered BookTube and BookTok and all that. And one thing I'm really, really grateful for kind of the online bookish community is kind of encouraging me to sort of decolonize my reading a bit. My bookshelves, when I first moved back up to Canada after grad school, was like pretty much all like white readers. There was like Zora Neale Hurston and Toni Morrison, and that was kind of it. Everyone else was like a white author. And so BookTube and BookTok have really, really been amazing at introducing me to sort of more diverse reading habits and amazing authors I'd never heard of before. And so that has really been a really great thing. And so that has all kind of led to me making videos here. At first, I wanted to make this channel just kind of the same as all the other like bookish channels, talking about, what am I reading? What do I want to read? But then it kind of turned into, I don't know, me wanting to engage with like the fun aspects of teaching, and just kind of ramble about things that I love, and just connecting with other readers and seeing what people are into and all that. So that is all great. So that overall is my reading journey, and it's been fun, and I can't wait to see it continue. And so with that, I will let you go. I will see you next week. Thank you so much for watching, and in the meantime, happy reading. Bye.